Okay, so Thomas. We're talking about the Apostle Thomas today. Familiar story for a lot of us. Thomas wasn't there when the resurrected Jesus appears to the apostles, and we don't really know why that is. Could be any number of reasons that he's not present at the time. Maybe he's out at the mall, or in any case, he's not there when Jesus appears among the disciples in that locked room. And when he returns, they're exuberant about the return of their Lord. But Thomas is not convinced. He says, "We have seen the Lord," but he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." Now, we don't really know all that much about Thomas from the biblical account, but what we do know is that he was extremely devoted to Jesus. Several weeks ago in the story of Mary and Martha and the raising of Lazarus, Jesus says, "Let's go back to the area around Jerusalem." All the other disciples say, "Are you crazy? Why would we go back there? They tried to kill you the last time you were there." Thomas is reluctant, but he's determined to follow. He is the one who says, "Let us go, that we may die with him." Thomas loved Jesus so very much. And it's kind of unfair to him. We have this English expression, doubting Thomas. This idea of the person who doubts about stuff that they really should believe that are self-evident. And often we think of Thomas as kind of the archetype of the scientific skeptical mind. That would be a good extrapolation for a sermon, but that's not what's originally going on here in the text. Thomas said, "Let us die with him. If we're all going to Jerusalem, then we will die with him." But yet, when Jesus is arrested and sentenced and crucified, instead of dying with him, Thomas is with the rest of the disciples cowering in Jerusalem. In one gospel account you have the two women, or the woman with the disciple whom Jesus loved, but all the rest of the disciples are gone. They're nowhere to be seen. And he doesn't even do as well as Peter, who gets into Jerusalem and denies Jesus 3 times and then flees. So for Thomas who loved Jesus so much, he must have been shattered by both Jesus' death and his own failure to stand with him as he had promised. Perhaps that's why Thomas isn't present. Perhaps Thomas, out of all the disciples, felt such shame that he could not remain with the other disciples. And now, these other disciples who are saying that Jesus is risen, it's too much for him to believe. He's failed his master. They've all failed their master. And now they have these delusional hallucinations that caused by their own guilt and grief that Jesus is somehow alive. Jesus is dead. And Thomas wants no part of it. Grief boils over into anger. He yells that unless he has proof, unless Jesus is standing there before him in the flesh, he will not believe. He can't believe. He's been hurt before, deeply and painfully, and he doesn't want to be hurt again. Does that story have a familiar ring to you? So many people I encounter in my ministry are in the same place as Thomas was. You were raised in the faith or attracted to the faith, but somewhere down the line, organized religion failed you. Religion was used as a weapon against you. Or a spiritual leader failed you. Or the church just made a decision that you felt was wrong. And somehow those pieces of your childhood faith simply don't fit together in the neat, locking way they used to. Something's missing, and you're still hungry. As humans, we hunger for meaning, for the spiritual, for the things that our consumer culture simply can't provide. But for many of us, we just can't get that puzzle piece back together as it might have been when we were younger. It's 1 week after Jesus first appeared to the disciples, and Thomas, despite his anger, grief, and probably distrust of the other disciples, is back with them. We don't know why he's back. Maybe he simply has nowhere else to go. Jesus again enters through locked doors, and he doesn't rebuke Thomas. Instead, he offers Thomas his wounds and tells Thomas that he may touch it. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the art, all based around Thomas, like here in the Caravaggio, which is probably the most well-known picture of Thomas, they always show him touching the wounds. That's not mentioned in the biblical account, because It's not the touching of the wounds that Thomas wanted. What he wants is Jesus. And Jesus is standing before him in body, although an obviously altered one because it walks through doors. And instead of touching the wounds, he immediately gasps in awe and love, "My Lord and my God." Jesus has ascended to his Father. He no longer comes among us bodily, but as he promised, he sent the Holy Spirit. Jesus is here among us today in the hearts of all who have been baptized into the new covenant. And Jesus is here among us today through the Holy Spirit in the elements of the bread and the wine which we take and offer as he did in the upper room. To those of you who have been burned before, I cannot promise you that the church will never hurt you again. And I can't promise you that you will never be mistreated by somebody inside the church. Because, how long I've been waiting to use that. The church is made up of human beings, and all human beings are hypocritical. Every single one of us do things that we say we shouldn't do. The church is full of flaws and hypocrisy. But I can promise you that despite the fact that the church is fallible, Jesus chooses to be here. And he is present for you. He's here in the bread and the wine and in the hearts of all who love him. He is here and he has invited you. Reach out, touch me, take, eat, drink me. Do not doubt, but believe. Amen.